I was a new nurse at our hospital and had only been working there a couple of months. I had brought a patient of mine up to day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they called back down and asked me to bring her family up because she only spoke Italian. They needed someone to consent for the procedure. After dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room to head back down the hall to the elevators. I took the back way to get to the ER, and the hallways are all deserted. It used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but that's all been shut down for years. The rooms are just empty and full of broken equipment and beds and crap. As I reached the old nurses' station at the T-junction, between the pediatric hallway and the hallway that goes to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station further down the hall. She had long pigtails, was wearing a brown dress, white shoes, and was holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the day surgery waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of the rooms and get hurt or lost. So I said, "Hey, little girl, what are you doing? You don't need to be over there. You're going to get hurt." I walked around the nursing station to go grab her hand and bring her back. I kid you not. As I got about 15 feet away from her, she vanished. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell down to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity until the elevator got to the floor. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, white as a sheet, and one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "Jesus Christ, what's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, the nurse said, "Oh, you saw the little girl ghost? She's been around here for years." I remember saying, "Well, thanks for telling me about it before this." Apparently, the ghost has even been seen down in the ER, ducking in and out of patient rooms and peeking around curtains. My wife worked up on the 7th floor, and she said that one night, a whole row of patient rooms started yelling about a little girl that was running around in the rooms. I guess she gets around. I heard a story from one of my nurse co-workers who said that one night she was floated to oncology at the hospital she used to work at. She was given a patient who was passing away and had been unconscious for several days. At one point during the night, the nurse went into the room and the patient was at the top of the bed. She looked at her and said, "Don't let them take me." The nurse was freaked out and asked her who was going to take her. She said, "That black thing up there," and she pointed up into the air to an area just above the nurse. But when my coworker looked, there was nothing there. The patient then dropped to the floor, seizing. The team rushed to her assistance. However, this patient died within the next few minutes. I used to work in a state institute for the developmentally disabled. We were temporarily relocated to another building for the remodeling of our building. Anyway, I was working one night during my second shift. I saw one of the residents walking down the hall. Very distinct yellow t-shirt with a happy face on it. I went into the ward to let staff know that they had an escapee. This was a serious situation because this particular resident, Liam, would ingest absolutely anything from clothing to pens to belts to a bird's head. Literally anything. He was also very reluctant to go back to his home ward, hence why I didn't try to bring him back myself. He needed 2 escorts. When we got back into the hall, less than 15 seconds later, Liam was gone. We searched the entire building. Outside, downstairs, all wards. He was nowhere to be found. This whole search lasted less than 10 minutes because I had all the extra staff looking for him. I was just about to call the house supervisor to let her know that we lost someone when out from the bathroom walks Liam with one of the staff. The staff member revealed that Liam had been getting his bath in the bathroom for the last 30 minutes or so. I was freaked out. I absolutely, without a doubt, saw him in the hallway. I never would have short-staffed the wards like I did if I hadn't seen him. Like I said, very distinctive gait, look, clothing. I took a lot of razzing that night. They all thought that I was crazy. Anyway, come to find out the next day, after the story went around that I'm crazy, Liam had an identical twin brother who had died in that same building 10 years previously. One night, I was caring for a dying male patient. He was scared, and I spent quite some time with him, trying to calm and reassure him. Eventually, he calmed, and I left the bedside and went over to the nurse's station, which was about 15 feet away. As I sat down, I glanced over to him, and there appeared to be a black shape floating over the bed, looking down at the patient. I was terrified, and I was sure it was something evil. Shortly after, he passed away. We had a patient who was always on the call button and hated being on fluid restrictions. You know the type. The nurses have to take turns during the shift answering the call button so the primary can actually do other work. And this was a frequent flyer because he was very chronic, very borderline, and the hospital was the only place he wouldn't fluid overload. I worked from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. He ended up dying at about 8 p.m. The look on his face was like, "How could you let me die?" As if it was our fault. Anyway, his family came and left by 9 p.m. The funeral home workers were gone by 9:30 p.m. At about 1:00 p.m., the call button started going off. I was there. It was going off every 5 minutes. One of the nurses was a very spiritual girl. At about 2 a.m., after like 4 hours of this, Nurse Mona snapped. "Enough!" she shouted. She walked down to the room and practically screamed into the empty room.
"Mr. Johnson, you have died. You can't be in here bothering us anymore. Move along. In the name of Jesus, I'm exorcising you from this plane of existence. Go to the light and be happy," she yelled. And I kid you not, the call button stopped going off right then and there.
There were a couple of stories from my unit. In bed 3, there was a homeless man, William, who thanks to modern medicine was kept alive for, I believe, around 3 months. William eventually passed away, but those who are in bed 3 after him will talk about their friend William, who brought them a blanket or stopped by to talk. Bed 3 is at the end of the unit and has an anteroom before you go in. You can't see bed 3 directly unless you're in the anteroom or looking at the room on the monitor. One night, with no one in bed 3, the monitor flipped to the room, and a body was seen laying over the side of the bed over the rails, kind of floating. However, the room was checked and no one was there. Another night, a nurse who has worked in the unit for a few years saw someone sitting in a chair behind the door in bed 3 with their legs crossed. She wondered, since we have limited visiting hours, how a family member had gotten into the room. However, she went into the room to ask them to leave and no one was there. Needless to say, she was freaked out. There was also another person, a young woman in her 20s who contracted necrotizing fasciitis from one of her kids who had strep. She was in the unit for a while and eventually died. One of the nurses coming on to the next shift wanted to know why she was standing on the backside of the unit with her twin daughters holding their hands, wondering how she made such a miraculous recovery. However, she was informed the young woman had died earlier that day.